You ever notice how some people just have this uncanny ability to twist reality? You walk away from a conversation feeling like you've just been through a mental gymnastics routine, except you didn't even know you were competing. One minute you're explaining how their actions hurt you, and the next thing you know, you're the villain in their story. Sound familiar? That's the magic trick of a narcissist. And let me tell you, it is a performance they have perfected. See, narcissists and truly manipulative people, the ones who thrive on control, they don't play fair. They rewrite the script of reality right in front of you. They don't just want to win the argument, they want to own the entire narrative. And the worst part, they do it in a way that makes you question yourself. That's the goal, that's the game. Because if they can get you to doubt your own perception, if they can make you feel like maybe, just maybe you're overreacting or being too sensitive, then they've already won. And let's be clear, they're not interested in truth, they're interested in control. Now, here's where it gets tricky. We assume that if we just explain ourselves clearly, if we present enough evidence, if we just get them to see how their actions impact us, they'll understand. But a narcissist doesn't want to understand. They want to maintain power. And the moment they sense you're catching on to their game, they'll change tactics. Maybe they'll play the victim. Maybe they'll turn on the charm. Maybe they'll gaslight you until you're not even sure what you were upset about in the first place. But no matter how they do it, the result is always the same. They maintain control, and you walk away drained, frustrated, and doubting yourself. And let's talk about that self-doubt for a second, because that's the real poison here. When someone is constantly distorting reality, shifting blame, and manipulating the narrative, it starts to erode your confidence in what you know to be true. That's the real danger of dealing with these people. It's not just that they lie, it's that they make you question your ability to recognize the truth. And once you start doubting yourself, they have all the power. But here's the thing, once you understand how they operate, once you see the pattern, you stop playing their game. Because the truth is, a narcissist doesn't actually have power over you. They only have the power you give them. They need your self-doubt. They need your willingness to explain. They need you to keep hoping they'll change. But the moment you recognize what's happening, the moment you stop trying to convince them to see your perspective, the spell is broken. And I know what you might be thinking, okay, but how do I actually do that? How do I stop playing a game I didn't even sign up for? That's what we're getting into, because there is a way. There's a way to stop the cycle, to throw them off balance, to take back your power, and it starts with one question. You ever notice how some conversations feel like a trap? Like no matter what you say, it somehow gets turned around on you. You start with something simple. Maybe you're setting a boundary. Maybe you're expressing how something made you feel. And before you know it, you're on the defensive. You're explaining yourself, justifying your emotions. And by the end of it, you're the one apologizing. And you sit there wondering, how did we even get here? That's what happens when you're up against someone who thrives on control, someone who doesn't just want to win the argument, but wants to keep you tangled in it. And if you've ever tried reasoning with a narcissist or a truly manipulative person, you know exactly how it goes. Logic doesn't work. Honesty gets weaponized. And no matter how many ways you try to make them understand, they refuse to hear you. Not because they can't, but because they won't. See, when someone is operating from a place of control, they don't engage in conversation the way you do. You're coming in with honesty, with curiosity, with a genuine hope that this can be resolved, but they're playing chess. They're scanning for weaknesses, waiting for the moment they can flip the script, because the moment you start defending yourself, they've already won. And this is where most people get stuck. They think if I just explain it differently, if I stay calm enough, if I show them I mean well, but you can't explain your way out of a game that was designed to keep you trapped. That's why arguing with a narcissist never leads to resolution. That's why trying to prove your side always backfires. Because the moment they sense they're losing ground, they shift tactics. Maybe they gaslight you, maybe they play the victim, maybe they act like they suddenly don't understand what you're saying, as if you're the one who's confused. And before you know it, you're exhausted, second-guessing yourself, and wondering if maybe, just maybe, they have a point. But here's the good news. There's a way to stop this cycle, a way to make sure you don't get pulled into their game. And it's not about out-arguing them. It's not about proving them wrong. It's about stopping them in their tracks. See, when someone is trying to manipulate you, they expect you to react. They expect you to start defending, explaining, and proving. That's what keeps them in control. But what they don't expect is for you to ask a single, simple question that forces them to reveal themselves. A question that shifts the power dynamic entirely. And when you ask it, you'll see something fascinating happen. Because the truth is, they're only good at controlling the conversation when they're the ones directing it. The moment they're put in a position where they have to be accountable, where they have to respond with honesty instead of manipulation, the whole thing starts to unravel, and that's where real power lies. You ever watch someone get caught off guard? I mean, really caught off guard, like they were so sure they had the upper hand, so certain they were in control, and then with just one move, the whole thing falls apart. That's what happens when you hit a narcissist with the right question. Not an argument, not a counterattack, just one simple question that forces them to do something they are completely unequipped to do. Be honest. See, narcissists and manipulative people are masters at controlling the narrative. They operate in a way that keeps them one step ahead, always twisting, always shifting, making sure they never have to be accountable. But here's the thing, when you ask them the right question, you're not just disrupting the conversation, you're exposing them. You're holding up a mirror they cannot stand to look into. And that question is deceptively simple. Ready? What would you do if you were in my shoes? Now, I know what you might be thinking. That doesn't sound like some genius takedown. It doesn't sound like a power move, but let me tell you, it is. Because what that question does is shift the dynamic entirely. It puts them in a position where they have to engage with empathy, or at least pretend to. And the truth is, they can't. See, when you ask someone this question, what would you do if you were me? A healthy person, someone with empathy, will pause, they'll reflect, they'll try to step into your experience, even if they don't agree with you. That's what normal, emotionally aware people do. But a narcissist, they short circuit. Because now they're stuck. If they answer honestly, if they admit that in your position they'd be hurt or frustrated too, then they're acknowledging that your feelings are valid. And they cannot do that because their whole strategy relies on making sure you're the unreasonable one. But if they refuse to answer, if they dodge the question, get defensive, or try to twist it back on you, well, now they're exposed. Now they've shown their hand. Because let's be real, what kind of person can't answer that question? What kind of person can't even pretend to put themselves in someone else's shoes? And here's where it gets really interesting. If they do answer, watch carefully, because narcissists don't think the way you do. They won't say what a normal, empathetic person would say. Instead, they'll project. They'll assume you think the way they do. So maybe they'll say something manipulative, something self-serving, because that's how they would act. And in that moment, they reveal themselves. It's like flipping on a light in a dark room. Suddenly you see everything clearly. The gaslighting, the blame shifting, the manipulation, it all loses its power because now you're no longer caught in their web. You're watching from the outside, and once you see the game for what it is, you stop playing. And let me tell you, they hate that. They hate being seen. They hate being put in a position where they can't manipulate their way out. That's why this works, because it forces them into a moment of truth, and truth is the one thing they cannot handle. So the next time you find yourself tangled in one of those conversations, the kind where you feel like you're being pulled under, where nothing makes sense, where you're questioning your reality instead of theirs, take a breath and ask, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Then watch. Because that answer will tell you everything you need to know. You ever see someone get backed into a corner, not physically, but with words? It's fascinating to watch. When someone who thrives on manipulation realizes they don't have an easy way out. You can almost see it happen. The flicker of panic, the moment of hesitation, it's subtle, but it's there. And that's exactly what happens when you ask them, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Now you might be wondering, why does that question work? Why does something so simple throw them off their game? The answer is actually pretty straightforward. It works because it disrupts their entire strategy. Narcissists and manipulative people rely on a very specific set of tactics to stay in control. They gaslight, they shift blame, they play the victim when it benefits them, and they keep you so busy defending yourself that you never stop to question what's really happening. But this question, this one simple question, it forces them to step outside of their usual playbook. It forces them into a scenario where they have to confront something they've spent their whole life avoiding: empathy. See, most people, healthy, emotionally aware people, hear that question and instinctively try to step into your perspective. Even if they don't agree with you, even if they're upset, they'll at least attempt to see things from your side. That's because empathy is a natural part of human connection. It's what allows us to resolve conflict, to understand one another, to grow. But a narcissist, they don't do that. They don't see other people as people. They see them as tools, as obstacles, as things to control. So when you ask them to put themselves in your position, they hit a wall. They can't do it. And that's when everything starts to unravel. Think about it. What are their options? If they answer honestly, if they actually acknowledge that in your shoes, they'd feel the same way, then they're admitting that your feelings are valid. And that's the one thing they cannot do, because the moment they validate your experience, their control starts to slip. Suddenly, they're no longer the one dictating reality, you are. But if they refuse to answer, if they dodge the question, deflect, or get defensive, then they expose themselves. They show you in real time exactly who they are. Because a person who genuinely cares about you, even in the middle of an argument, will at least try to understand where you're coming from. But someone who thrives on control, someone who sees you as a means to an end, they can't go there, they won't. And that silence, that evasion, that tells you everything you need to know. And here's the best part. It doesn't just tell you who they are. It tells them that you see it too. That's what makes this so powerful, because narcissists and manipulative people don't just thrive on control, they thrive on secrecy. They rely on keeping you confused, keeping you off balance, making you question yourself. The second you stop playing along, the second you hold up that mirror and force them to look at themselves, the entire game changes. And they hate that. They hate being exposed. They hate losing control. That's why when you ask this question, you'll often see them try to turn it back on you. They'll say something like, why are you even asking me that? Or, that's a ridiculous question. Maybe they'll laugh it off, act like you're being dramatic, try to make you feel small for even asking. But pay attention, because that reaction, that's the proof. That's them floundering, grasping for a way out, realizing that for the first time, they don't have the upper hand. And that's the moment you take your power back. Because once you see it, once you really see it, you can't unsee it. You stop getting sucked into their manipulations. You stop explaining yourself to someone who was never listening in the first place. You stop giving them the benefit of the doubt when they've never once given it to you. So the next time you feel that familiar spiral, the one where the conversation isn't making sense, where you're being made to feel guilty for something that shouldn't even be an issue, where you know deep down you're being played, pause, take a breath, and ask, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Then watch, because that reaction, that's where the truth lives. You ever walk away from a conversation feeling like you just got hit by a truck? Not physically, but emotionally. Like you went in thinking it was going to be a simple discussion. Maybe you were setting a boundary. Maybe you were addressing something that hurt you. And somehow by the end of it, you're the one apologizing, you're the one questioning yourself, and the person who actually did something wrong, they're sitting there completely unfazed, like they just walked away with more power than they had before. That's what it feels like to deal with a narcissist or a truly manipulative person. It's exhausting, disorienting, and if you're not careful, it can start to chip away at the way you see yourself. But now, you've got something they weren't expecting. Now you know how to shift the dynamic. You know that one question, what would you do if you were in my shoes, stops them in their tracks. You know, that it forces them to reveal who they really are, because either they refuse to answer or they give you an answer that tells you everything you need to know. But here's the thing, asking the question is just the first step. The real power comes in what you do next, because once you have that information, once they've shown you their hand, you have to decide what to do with it. And this is where a lot of people struggle, because knowing the truth about someone, really knowing, is one thing. Accepting it, that's something else entirely. We want to believe people can change. We want to believe that if we just say the right thing, if we just explain ourselves in the perfect way, they'll finally get it. But if you've ever dealt with someone like this before, you already know that moment never comes. Because a narcissist isn't interested in understanding you, they're interested in controlling you. So when you ask the question and they evade or deflect or turn it back on you, the first thing you have to do is resist the urge to explain. That's the trap they set every time. Getting you to prove yourself, to defend yourself, to work harder just to be heard. But the moment you realize they don't want to hear you, you stop trying. And that's where the power shifts. Because here's the truth. You don't need their validation. You don't need them to admit they were wrong. You don't need them to change in order for you to move forward. What you need is clarity. And that's exactly what this question gives you. Once you see them for who they are, your job is to protect your energy. That might mean setting firmer boundaries, refusing to engage in conversations that drain you, refusing to be pulled into arguments that go nowhere. That might mean distancing yourself altogether, because some people, no matter how much you care about them, are simply not safe to keep in your life. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to fight back or to prove them wrong, but to simply walk away and refuse to play their game. And I know that's easier said than done, because manipulation is sneaky. It doesn't just happen in the moment, it builds over time. It makes you doubt yourself. It makes you wonder if maybe you are overreacting, if maybe you should give them another chance. But listen to me, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Don't wait for more proof. Don't wait for them to do something worse just so you finally feel justified in trusting your gut. That moment you feel that hesitation, that moment you feel yourself second guessing what you know is true, that's when you have to remind yourself, I already have my answer. Because at the end of the day, it's not about outsmarting them. It's not about beating them at their own game. It's about recognizing that you don't have to play in the first place. You don't have to stay in conversations that make you feel small. You don't have to keep giving your energy to someone who only takes. And you don't have to wait for permission to protect your peace. So the next time you find yourself in one of those moments, the ones where you can feel the manipulation creeping in, the ones where your instincts are telling you something isn't right, pause, take a breath, ask the question, and then when you get your answer, trust yourself enough to act on it. Because once you see the truth, the only thing left to do is decide what you're going to do with it. There's a moment, a very specific moment, when everything becomes clear. It happens when you've asked the question, what would you do if you were in my shoes? And you've watched their response. Maybe they got defensive. Maybe they dodged it. Maybe they twisted it back on you, tried to make you feel guilty just for asking. Whatever it was, you saw it, you felt it. And in that instant, there's no more room for confusion. No more second guessing, no more bending over backward trying to get them to understand, because now you know exactly who you're dealing with. And that changes everything, because once you see someone for who they truly are, you can't unsee it. You can't pretend there's someone different. You can't keep holding out hope that maybe if you explain yourself one more time, if you just prove you're coming from a good place, they'll finally get it. That's the hardest part of all of this, not the question itself, not the answer they give, but what comes after, the part where you have to decide what you're going to do now that you have the truth. And the truth is, some people will never meet you where you are. No matter how much love, patience, or grace you offer, they will always choose their own control over real connection. And if you keep trying to change that, if you keep trying to earn something they are fundamentally incapable of giving, you will spend your life exhausted. You will spend your life questioning your worth, wondering if maybe you were the problem all along. And that's the real damage of staying in these kinds of dynamics. It's not just the arguments or the confusion, it's what it does to your sense of self. Because manipulation doesn't just affect how you see them, it affects how you see you. It makes you feel like you're too much or not enough. It makes you believe that maybe your feelings are unreasonable, that maybe the way you see things isn't as clear as you thought. That's why narcissists and toxic people work so hard to keep you second guessing, because as long as you're doubting yourself, they stay in control. As long as you're trying to prove your worth to them, they never have to prove anything to you. But here's the most important thing to remember. You don't owe anyone endless chances to hurt you. You don't owe anyone access to your peace, your time, your energy, especially not someone who has shown you over and over again that they will only use it to serve themselves. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. Out of the simple, undeniable truth that you deserve better. And I know that's easier said than done, because when you care about someone, when you've invested in them, when you've built a life with them, whether it's a friend, a family member, a partner, walking away isn't just about leaving them, it's about letting go of the hope that they'll ever be different. And that's the hardest part. Letting go of the version of them you wished was real. The version you held on to, the one you kept trying to bring out. But the thing is, you're not responsible for pulling someone into their best self. That's their job. And if they refuse to do that work, if they refuse to show up for you in the way you deserve, then all you're doing by staying is dimming your own light just to make space for their darkness. So the real question isn't how do I make them understand? The real question is how much longer am I willing to betray myself just to keep the peace? Because at the end of the day, that's the real cost of staying stuck in these patterns. You start making yourself small. You start suppressing your own needs, your own instincts, just to avoid another fight, another moment of doubt, another round of gaslighting that makes you question reality. And that's not living, that's survival. But the moment you see the truth, the moment you stop trying to get them to change and instead focus on what you need, that's the moment you start reclaiming yourself. That's the moment you take your power back, because it's never been about them, it's been about you, about trusting your own voice, about recognizing that you are worthy of relationships that don't leave you feeling depleted and confused, about choosing yourself, even when it's hard. So the next time you find yourself standing in front of someone who refuses to meet you halfway, someone who dodges accountability, someone who only values you as long as you are easy to control, remember this: you don't have to stay, you don't have to explain, you don't have to keep proving something they've already decided not to see. All you have to do is trust what you already know and move forward accordingly.